occasionally.
Jan, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me. Any moment now, I'm hoping that Dan Cook is going to burst through the door. He is our new Chief Executive. I've got a sort of three-part presentation. So I'm going to just tell you two little stories, and then I'm going to give you a snapshot of what I think is going on at the moment. And I've been doing a lot of movements around the country, all over the place, and I'm learning every day. And then perhaps just spend a few minutes on where I think the future opportunities are for the profession. I mean, I think some of you have heard me say this before. I think actually we are in a really exciting profession. We're at that interface between natural systems and people. And I think that's a unique position that we occupy. And I think the future is actually about natural systems. So I think that there is going to be a lot more development in terms of biological science and social sciences, and that is our pitch. So the stories I want to tell you, I want to just quickly explain. I had a totally spoiled childhood. I was brought up in the Falkland Islands and in the Rift Valley in Tanzania. That's where I spent most of my uncontrolled time. And with an interest in the arts, this was a natural progression to the landscape profession, landscape architecture. I was qualified from Cheltenham, and I broke both the two rules that I was set from day one: never work in the public sector, and never work in more than 2 years for your first 5 jobs. So that was your message to get to the top. I broke both of those rules. I went straight into the public sector. I've had the most exciting public sector life, I have to tell you. And I'm afraid I've only occupied 2 jobs. And the last one, I think I was there for 35 years when I dared with them. So what I'm going to do is just to give you, as I said, a little bit of interest over 2 particular things that happened to me. Because we, as a profession, we are testing all the time. We are, we actually run quite a difficult argument. And one of the things I've learnt in my trips around is that actually we need to balance the sciences and the arts. And I shall be coming back to that. I'm going to hope I press the right button. So my first misdemeanor. Sorry about the blurred image. A lot of my images are much better than this, but this one is one of my old images. This you probably remember as the place they filmed Downton Abbey. This is actually Highclere Castle, and it has a 7,000-acre estate, including 1,000 acres of pure capability ground. And it was the great-grandfather, of the current Lord Carnarvon who found the tomb of Tutankhamun. When I joined Hampshire, and I was the county landscape architect for Hampshire for that number of years, one of the things I noticed very quickly was that the big rural estates were being broken up because of inheritance tax. And I did quite a lot of work on this and discovered what the Labour Party had brought in 1976, Section 77 of the 1976 Finance Act, to be precise, was this designation, heritage land. Actually, not many of our profession know anything about that designation. So it is a landscape designation. And it is all about relief from inheritance tax. And nobody knew anything about this, so I did a lot of work on it. In fact, the Field then suddenly published an article about me and the work that I was doing. And that then attracted a phone call from Lord Carnarvon, who had just paid a 7-figure tax bill because he had transferred the estate to his son and to his grandson. I then walked the estate, and at the end of the day I said, you shouldn't have paid a penny. And as the final clearance certificate hadn't been paid, he was able to get a 7-figure tax rebate, which he did. However, I quickly found there were some issues that didn't work with this designation. This is conditional exemption, by the way. There was a management plan that goes with that 7,000 acre estate. And then I was asked by the government to supervise it and all the others that I had actually actively encouraged. And I used to have an annual meeting in the castle with Lord Carnarvon, actually dealing with the conditions attached to this relief. Now, I make this point, by the way, because actually a landscape architect is in charge of heritage land designation in this country. It's actually securing the management of the natural heritage. Her name is Amanda Matthews in Natural England. Not many people actually know anything about this piece of legislation at all. But it's very, very important because it keeps families intact. And in this case, you can now walk in the park because one of the conditions was making it accessible to the public. The other big condition is all about sustaining management of this resource, which is a very expensive business, believe me. There's a temple in this Cape of G. Brown landscape that has just been restored. It cost £350,000 just to restore it, and it's just a visual icon. It's not, has no function at all. So this is big money that's going into the heritage. Then we had an interesting tension with communications masts had to go up on the neighbouring estate. On this estate, but very close to the boundary. And I said to the Capital Taxes Office, look, you've got to involve the local planning authority. Oh, no. We're not allowed to tell the local planning authority that this is heritage land. And I said, why not? Oh, no, this is confidential. Nobody must know. And I said, but hang on a second. The nation has foregone a 7-figure tax bill. Surely they should know what public benefits is accrued from foregoing that income. So they absolutely denied, and I wasn't able to tell the local planning authority that actually this was a constraint on this development, and I should have done because it was going to threaten this designation, heritage land. And then dispatches, Channel 4's dispatches, I don't even know whether it's still going, got wind of this debate that I was having with the Capital Taxes Office. Then we had we prepared a documentary, and the sort of centerpiece of the documentary was me standing in front of the camera announcing all of the estates in my particular county that had heritage land designation. And of course the reaction from the government was, he's broken all the rules. And so the Treasury solicitor then took Council's opinion because they were going to prosecute me for making this announcement. But Council's opinion was, hang on a second, he's right. This is all to be in the public domain. So I'm actually pleased to say that it is now on the Treasury website. If you want to go look at all the land in this country that is now open for public examination, of course not the financial matters, those are confidential, but at least the commitment to the management and all the access conditions, they are now in the public domain. But there was a moment when I thought, gosh, I'm going to be taken to the court over breaking confidences. The next one, some of you will know this story, but I thought it was worth just talking about. This is a piece of landscape just outside Winchester, and it's an extraordinary piece of landscape because most cities build on top of their origins, and you've lost the prehistoric landscape. But in Winchester, the Romans decided to leave the prehistoric landscape intact and move Roman Winchester the other side of the valley. So what you've actually got here, and I'll just you've got the Iron Age hill fort of St Catherine's Hill. You've got the Arethusa clump, which is actually the old dew pond from the Bronze Age settlement. And you can see a dark line there. Can you see that dark line there? And then can you just see a faint zigzag going up this? These are Celtic field systems. These are field systems that are 4,000 years old. And what you've got actually is an entirely intact prehistoric landscape. So the village on the flat part, with its dew pond and its field systems, and its Iron Age hill fort. Of course, Iron Age, it became, the Iron Age was the Bronze Age was very successful. And population grew and grew and grew. And in the Iron Age, it grew to such an extent there was a lot of conflict. So hence you see Iron Age hill forts all over the landscape. You don't see Bronze Age hill forts. So that is quite a unique piece of landscape. So when I took over my job in Winchester, my boss, who was the county planning officer, said, well, now Merrick, one of your tasks is, please, will you sort out the M3 motorway as it passes Winchester? So I said, okay, I'll work with the Department of Transport on this challenging task. And to be frank with you, despite my best efforts, I really got nowhere. The Department of Transport were in cahoots with Winchester College. Winchester College, by the way, all this land had been donated to Winchester College by two dons, because somebody put housing plots all over this landscape, and two dons from the college decided to protect it by purchasing it and then gifting it to the college. Anyway, I got nowhere, and the next thing that happened was that this drawing was then published by the Department of Transport as the drawing that demonstrated the impact of this route of the motorway through this landscape. But it was bizarre. I mean, and this is despite my energy trying to get the scheduling of monuments all properly marked. So this one, for example, that is a scheduled ancient monument, but it looks as though they've been quite clever and they've missed it. There are lots of other parts, but we haven't got time to go through the details. But that's actually what the village site was. It wasn't a small star, and the motorway wasn't quite missing it. But it was quite extraordinary how the Department of Transport decided that they were going to have this route, and it didn't matter that it destroyed two scheduled monuments, two sites of special scientific interest, and cut this sort of cavity into the chalk. So I produced a report to the county council, and I said, there's no way we can support this. My report never got anywhere because the lawyer stopped it, and he said, oh no, my instructions are we'll complete this motorway quickly, and in light of that instruction we must support whatever route the Department of Transport produces. So I said, hang on a second, I'm quite happy for my report to go to the members and then for them to say no, in the interest of speed we will support the Department of Transport. But if the County Council know nothing, as Highway Authority know nothing about the environmental impact of this development, surely that's running against our democratic process. Anyway, they refused to do this, so they came out and supported it, and I decided I had to take private action against the Department of Transport. So I then ran a campaign for 7 years, which actually forced the public inquiry to be reopened. And I was being kept informed behind the scenes by people in government who supported my objection. And it was obviously quite effective, because there was a moment in time when I had a call and we had a meeting place set aside. I had a call, will we meet please? And I went off to Selborne, car park in Selborne was where we met. And he said, you need to know that my office has just been raided by a special branch. The typing pool in Bristol has just been raided by a special branch. They've just taken the chief inspector in, and the consultant engineers have had their offices raided. And when you get back to your office will be completely invaded by a special branch. So that was the longest journey I think I've ever taken, because I'm quite a law-abiding sort of chap. And I thought I was going to get to my office and find special branch crawling all over it. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. And for another 10 days nothing happened, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I decided to get back in touch with my contact. And the bizarre thing was that the special branch decided that they couldn't find out who was making the money out of this objection. And they decided it had to be the consultant engineers. because they obviously, every time the inquiries reopened or new routes were published, the one organisation that was making a very considerable amount of money was Mott, Hay and Anderson, Mott MacDonald, the consultant engineers. And can I just tell you, 30 years later, there are still engineers in Winchester who almost turn when they see me and walk the other way. I mean, they were so seriously upset by this. But how bizarre. Anyway, it's a very, there's a book about it, by the way, not that I wrote it. And there were alternative routes. This is the tunnel. I actually put together a financial package with Barings Bank when it was a viable bank, and Union Bank Suisse to pay for this privately with 130 million. And we had this sort of thing happening where, does anybody remember David Bellamy?
Yeah.
I don't know what's happened to David Bellamy, but anyway, he asked for a briefing, so I went up to London, met him on the train, briefed him on the way back, and we turned up at the site, and this is what met us, and this was actually army personnel moonlighting for Group 4, I think it was, to make sure that the scheduled monuments, the SSSI and the AMB were destroyed as a result of this. But it obviously got a lot of attention in the press, and a lot of people turned out to try to prevent it happening. And his comment was, but this is England. I didn't tell him, well, this is an everyday story about decisions in the UK, planning decisions. So this ended actually when I took the government to the High Court, and I lost the action on the basis that the government had failed to comply with the European Directive on Environmental Impact Assessment, and indeed failed to produce a non-technical summary to engage the public in understanding the implications of a development. We lost the High Court action, and I then made a complaint to Europe. And Europe looked at my complaint, looked at the government's response, and found in my favour. They served a letter under Article 169 of the Treaty of Rome, which is the start of a formal legal process against a member state for non-compliance. So that was interesting. My barrister then said, great, 169 letter, we can now serve an injunction to stop this development. And now this wouldn't happen in this country. I had a phone call from a man called Ludwig Kramer, who was the legal advisor. You won't remember his name. Rupert de Miano, do you remember his name? He was the Environment Commissioner. I had a phone call from the top legal advisor, and he said, don't do it, Merrick. There's no doubt about it. You will, in the Court of Appeal, you will get a hearing, you will serve an injunction and stop this contract. And I said that, and I said, Europe, you've tried it once and it failed. By the time you had served the injunction, the site had already been destroyed. And he said, don't do it because there's been a deal between Jacques Delors and John Major. I said, don't be ridiculous. This is a bit of asphalt around Winchester. No, he said, you don't understand. On Thursday, when you serve the injunction, 80 infrastructure projects all over the UK will have to stop. And it includes 8 motorways, 24 trunk roads. I mean, the list was enormous. My barrister said, look, you've got to pull out now because this is very tricky stuff. They can't afford to lose this. And if this deal has happened, then you would have served an injunction stopping a £15 million contract, and then this deal emerges and you'll be left holding the baby. So it's haunted me because I did pull out. As you can see, the motorway was built. The deal was over withdrawal of the letter by Jacques Delors, and John Major then supported the budget of Maastricht. That was what the deal was about. But of course it was enormous, the implications, the potential implications of this. So I suppose the only thing that I would say of benefit to this was that the one thing that did happen after that was that the Department of Transport and other infrastructure projects have adhered to the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive to the letter. They have pursued it. One closing remark I'd make on this story is that actually the deal rolled out by the department saying we've undertaken an environmental impact assessment directive, and they showed this statement of reason. Now that probably won't mean anything to you, but it is a legal document that sets out the legal framework for public acquisition of land to build infrastructure. So it in no way ever complied with the quality that we know environmental impact assessments should be pursuing. And so I think if we'd made a lot of noise at the time, this was the first time Europe had ever accredited an environmental impact assessment. And that would have been very dangerous because it was a shoddy piece of work. It could never have stood the light of day. And in fact, if I'd known that they were going to use that device, it wouldn't have lasted 10 seconds in the European courts, let alone in our own courts. Again, interesting. It had a good ending in terms of the long term and the commitment to the directive. But of course the impact on that landscape is there for all to see. Village sites is all gone. And what I've got, of course, are all the slides of the grain silos and the roundhouses. They were all explored before the building of the motorway. But as I said, that's a lecture in its own right, and I don't want to spend any more time on it. So that's sort of just two little naughty stories about my past. I think I just want to then talk momentarily for where we are today. I think that the most important thing is that we are, as an institute, serving the membership, empowering the membership to deliver the public good. So that we're on the case, and the Board of Trustees know that, and our executive officers know that we are your servants. There has been a need to align the Board of Trustees with the Advisory Council. In effect, our Secretariat was servicing two non-executive boards, and there was no proper alignment. So what Noel and I have been doing before Dan, who has now arrived. Dan, welcome, and nice to see you. There's our new Chief Executive at the back there. We've brought those two together now so that the Board of Trustees are making decisions that have been market tested. And the critical point is that there is a unbroken golden thread between a board decision and an ordinary member of the Institute, all of you. And your communications, obviously, through the branch, and the branch has a straight way into the advisory council. And the point about that is that there is less risk if the board is now making decisions based upon advisory council recommendations. We made a big strategic decision about broadening the membership, and if I just spend a couple of seconds on that, we made a big decision 40 years ago, some of us will remember it, changing our name from the Institute of Landscape Architects to the Landscape Institute, but then nothing happened. And in fact, in the meantime, it's become a very, very crowded place with organisations like CIEM being set up and others. So the way I explain it is that landscape architecture has given birth to a process of understanding the science of the place, understanding humanity's needs, defining the policy and the strategy, the design brief, the design, the implementation, the transformation, and the management and the evaluation. The breadth and the depth of our profession now is so massive that you can't lock up all those skills in one person. And we've got to recognise we've given birth to a series of professions in their own right. And so the fact we have become a crowded place, what I think we're trying to do, and Dan and I are working on this at the moment, is thinking about reciprocal arrangements with other professional bodies, working much more collaboratively, in partnership with them, not duplicating, and filling cavities. So there's one or two big cavities about. For example, national parks and AONBs. These are protected landscapes. They are transforming the landscape, not through design, but through policy or through regulation or through incentives or tax relief, or a whole variety of methods of transforming landscapes that have nothing to do with design. But we want to work collaboratively. We want them in the Institute because they are doing that transformation. And so the National Association of AONBs, Howard Davis, the Chief Executive, came to us and said, well, we're thinking of setting up a new organisation because at times of austerity, we need a license to operate. And we've said, Dan and I, don't do that. Let's talk. How can we actually provide the accreditation? And they're really after quality. They're not after a slippery way into the institute. They want to be tested. They want, because they need that license to operate. So that's a really interesting thing. We must now get on the case, because of course it's been hanging around a long time. Believe me, if we don't take action, we're going to be boxed into a very small space that is getting smaller. And that brings me to my next point. Up and down the country I've been going, and I've got this horrible, and I did pose a question to you about, have we got the balance between the arts and the sciences right? And I'm going to go on and say, from my perspective, we haven't. And it's not just the obvious of biological sciences. What about the social sciences? And I'll come back to that point in a minute. We have hemorrhaged our profession from the public sector. It's really, really serious. And we're going to have to think about how do we re-establish the influence. And what is fantastic about this profession is that you could quite easily see a time when the private sector say, oh, we don't need anybody in the public sector. We can do all that. Actually, all of our trips all over the country, the private sector saying, we are vulnerable because we don't have a strong public sector. So that is fantastic. So that symbiotic relationship between the private and public sector is recognised. But I think that our challenge is to not try to reinvent. And the last thing I want to do is for the Institute to be taking any action that undermines existing landscape groups within the public sector. We must not do that. But at the same time, we've perhaps got to lift our influence to a strategic level. So one of the points I keep trying to make is that we deal in this country in a whole series of silos. The public sector is broken into silos. I think we can do more to transform the lives of children than any other profession. I think we can do more for dementia sufferers than any other profession. I think we can do more about building resilience to climate change than any other profession. You see my train of thought. We are actually dealing with a whole series of silos, and we're very cross-cutting. So what we think we're working on is the idea of having a corporate head of landscape and ecology, and we can have a debate about that last bit, but I actually passionately believe we ought to be bringing us together, working with CIEM more collaboratively. We've been working, Dan and I have met the chief executive and started talking about this, and they're up for this, by the way, CIEM, Sally Haynes, chief executive, and get it as a corporate post within government. So we're trialling it in Northern Ireland. We went across to Northern Ireland, we did a presentation to all the installment, to all the chief planning officers, and all the chair of planning committees were invited. Only 3 or 4 turned up, but there are only 11, by the way, in Northern Ireland. They made the political brave decision to bring down their number of local authorities from 23, I think it was, to 11. The great thing was, the first big message we got back from the elected members as well as the chief planning officers, we had no idea that the landscape profession could deliver across such a wide area of work. And the second point they made is, we need you. We can't really operate without you. These were just planners, and they were saying immediately, but we can't afford you. So we said, well, hang on a second. We actually service corporately across all the services of your authority, not just planning, not just regulation. What about your own capital program? What about your own estate? What about empowerment of local communities? All of these we can deliver on. So our next strategy is to go and talk to all the chief executives to try to get an understanding of the role that our profession can play corporately. So we're just trying it out in Northern Ireland, and we're beginning to have this conversation with authorities in England as well. So the whole issue about green infrastructure, and you will know that there is an inquiry going on about parks. I think the observation we made, I gave some evidence to the Select Committee, not as articulate as I would have liked to have been there. Robert actually kindly came and threw rotten eggs at me. But the point we made to the Select Committee is if you do nothing else, do establish some leadership in government, because where is green infrastructure? Does it sit with DEFRA? Does it sit with DCMS? Does it sit with DCLG? Sorry, that's the Department of Communities and Local Government, Culture, Media and Sport, or is it DEFRA, the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs? It's in fact all of those, but nobody's taking a lead. And we need political leadership, and we need the infrastructure in the civil service for us to get anywhere in terms of policy and commitment. We need to reposition what we're doing to master planning. So I'm really keen on developing landscape planning. And in fact, if you go around practices, a lot of them are beginning to change their titles to planning, to master planning, landscape planning. And I think that's a crucial piece of dialogue that we need with society. That we actually need to be now the master planners. And the architects will do as they're told. And we've got to be very attentive to this business about management. And of course, the debate in the Select Committee is, should it be a statutory obligation on local government to provide and manage parks and urban spaces? Now, this is an important debate for us, because if the iconic parks are not managed, what about all the rest of the green infrastructure that we are associated with in terms of SUDs and all the social health and well-being agenda? This has got to be sorted out. And we put over quite a strong case, I hope people felt it was strong, to the Select Committee, that yes, it should be a statutory obligation. It's not necessarily going to solve all the problems, but it should be a statutory obligation in terms of placing and government recognising the importance of it in terms of the future of society. But we added a little clause to it that is not just about a statutory obligation on the local authority to provide and manage, but to secure through their regulatory processes. So they've got a choice. They can either do it themselves, or they can actually force the provision and the management in the long term by the private sector. Now that is playing the Tory party game. That's basically saying we're not about growing local government, we're actually saying they've got to do their job. They've got to regulate, and they've got to do it with some teeth. And this whole issue about housing and not homes, well, we're just about to produce, and Noel has contributed to this and others have contributed to this, a position statement on housing. It's designed specifically to target planning authorities and the inspectorate, the planning inspectorate. And it is going to major on that point about this is where people are wanting to live. This is not about housing numbers. This is about quality. This is about fully integrating and understanding that we're actually providing for children as well as for old people, balanced communities, and adhering to the new standards, environmental standards of carbon footprint, of things like sustainable drainage, things about reconnecting people with food growing, about transforming the biological health of these landscapes, the point about resilience to climate change, about microclimate control, and all of these things fully integrated. Noel and I are having a little interesting debate about Greenbelt. I'm just prodding him a little bit, naughty of me. In that I think, again, this is our business. I don't think this is planning business anymore. I think Greenbelt is our business. I think planners have made a real mess of it. Sorry, planners amongst you. In that it's been, white land. There's been nothing positive about Greenbelt. Yes, of course, the origins of preventing coalescence and ribbon development, those are even more important today than they were at the outset of the designation. But it predates sustainable development. It's dysfunctional. Nobody trusts it as legislation anymore because the government themselves, we're just waiting, aren't we, for the consultation they put out on building on brownfields in Greenbelt and starter homes in Greenbelt. So on the one hand, the government say we are committed to Greenbelt, on the next they're consulting the world on developing the Greenbelt. So we are basically saying, I think this is something we can say collectively, that it is dysfunctional, there is a desperate need for preventing coalescence and urban development. That is a very important objective. But we cannot have greenbelt strangling cities and towns, and we can't have the masking of infrastructure by greenbelt. So there are some tensions here where, yes, we will have to modernize it, there will have to be some development, but we are going to have to then designate more greenbelt, because of course what many people don't understand, it was up to the Strategic Planning Authority's discretion whether they used greenbelt as a device. My own county, for example, Hampshire, said, oh, we're not going to have any greenbelt. We're going to have strategic gaps that prevents the coalescence but enables the settlements to breathe. Now, that structure planning, strategic planning, regional planning is all gone. We've got nothing now between National Planning Policy Framework up here and local delivery. I mean, I don't think we can go on like that any longer anyway. I think we've got to have some spatial planning. It's got to take place. We cannot go on in this way. If you're going to plan infrastructure on that point alone, you've got to have a subnational spatial planning, whatever form that is taken. So I'm really up for this debate, and I've written 3 articles for planning, and I've suddenly noticed the RTPI have suddenly, in the last 10 days, lifted their head above the parapet. Well, if we've done nothing else, we've actually stimulated that to happen. Brexit. I'm sorry, this is the area that I know a little bit more about, so I mustn't spend too long on it. But for me, Brexit is a fabulous opportunity for us as a profession. I'm not, CIM are very anxious about the dismantling of the European environmental directives. My answer is we could become very paranoid about this. But actually, the UK wrote most of the environmental directives of Parliament. We wrote them. And I'm 100% certain that the vote for exiting Europe had nothing to do with dismantling environmental legislation. So I've made it very clear, over my dead body, will they dismantle any of the environmental directives. That's the Birds Directive, Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive, Environmental Impact Assessment, and you know the list. I don't think personally that will happen, but we are attentive and we're ready to roll if that should be the case. But as with this government, what people don't really understand, and I try to get this across to CIM actually, Europe works in silos. DG Agriculture took no notice whatsoever of DG Environment. None whatsoever. And that's exactly what happens in the UK, and that's exactly what happens in Europe. So Brexit gives us an opportunity, one of the opportunities. I'm not, by the way, a supporter of Brexit. I ought to just come clean. I held a family conference 4 days before, it was Father's Day, probably know this, and I got my 4 children together and I said we will debate, after a good lunch, we will debate Brexit, and then we will have a vote. And I will do as you tell me, because it's your lives, not my life. And I did what my children said, all 4 said, we want to remain, and all for different reasons. Some environmental, by the way, because I have an elder daughter who's a landscape architect, I have a younger daughter who's an ecologist, I have an elder son who's a worm farmer, and a young son who is involved in urban regeneration. I'm an optimist. I look for opportunities, and one of the opportunities, of course, is that we can actually begin to have a proper vision for multifunctional countryside, because the divide between town and country is there physically, but actually no longer can we have that divide. We've got to integrate, and we've got to go for multifunctional countryside, not just in the obvious of sustainable food production and food security, but all the other things about clean water, clean air, about social health and well-being, access for that, resilience to climate change. And I show this slide because this slide is of a national park. This is the latest national park, South Downs. It has this facade of respectability, but don't believe that. This landscape is lethal. This is lethal. Slug pellets kill everything. Okay? Everything. Even glyphosate kills amphibians. That's new evidence of the scientific fact. These woodlands are all unmanaged. No management going on at all of all woodlands. This agriculture relies entirely on phosphates and nitrates. Let's just take nitrates as an example. Millions of tons, if you take the chalk belt from Eastbourne all the way through to Swindon, millions of tons a year of nitrates. Nitrates come from natural gas. This is a crude statement, this. 50% of the nitrates get to the crop, 25% of the nitrates get to the aquifers, and 25% goes up in nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide, 300 times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of climate change. 300 times worse. Nitrate pollution of aquifers is now so serious that if you go from Portsmouth, and I'm sorry about geographic, go from Portsmouth all the way through to beyond Brighton, all the water companies are importing water to dilute the drinking water. It's called blending. So this is really serious stuff. This is a protected, iconic landscape that is poisonous. It is dead. The soil is a growing medium. Structureless, no carbon content, devoid of biodiversity. And I sat on the board of Natural England when they produced a report on the state of the environment. I said, look, of all government organisations who should be pointing out that our soils are really the foundation of our living, are so depleted of biodiversity, Natural England should be the one that's crying that from the rooftops and making strong statements. So I'm hoping that actually we can transform this ambition. By the way, here's another bit of dysfunctionalism. National parks are required under the 95 Environment Act, and AONBs are required under the Crow Act to produce management plans. That's a statutory obligation to produce management plans. There is no statutory obligation on anybody to do anything about them. And in fact, the organisations that hold all the money, all the government agencies, they have no obligation to do anything about the management plan. Well, that is really dysfunctional. That is really, in this day and age, can we really afford for this sort of thing to happen? Particularly in our most precious and heavily designated landscapes like national parks and AONBs. And just to provoke you even more, I think it's ridiculous, by the way, that we have AONBs, because they have exactly the same quality as national parks. And the only difference is that national park authorities are required not only to conserve the outstanding landscape quality, but to make tourism and access to them. Well, are you saying that we don't provide access to AONBs? No, we don't. We really ought to think about single-purpose designations have had their day. And that goes back to my point about Greenbelt. We ought to have management plans for Greenbelt. We ought to now be stimulating investment, public investment through perhaps countryside stewardship for Greenbelt to actually bring, because they are close to where people live in terms of access for health and well-being. So just to say, there are alternatives. This guy is a friend of mine, Henry Edmonds. He manages 2,500 acres on the chalk. And this is about making sure that we have alternative systems in mind before we make a noise. And he has this very shallow soil over chalk. He has a private water company. He became very alarmed because his nitrates were going up in his water. But he doesn't put any nitrogen on his land. He fixes nitrogen. So this particular plant is Hampshire Sandvine. He integrates integrated crop management system, fixes airborne nitrogen, and it's locked up into the carbon of the plant, which is then ploughed in and slow released. It turns out that the Environment Agency then sunk a whole series of wells to establish whether it was his nitrogen fixing that was ending up in his aquifer. No, it wasn't. It was from neighbouring estates laterally moving into his aquifer. So he's had to invest £500,000 in a bit of kit to actually strip nitrogen for all his water taxpayers. Good, because we've got now, the Minister has finally agreed, I don't think Noel knows this, but Dan will, the Minister's now coming to Sea Lions Estate on Thursday. So I'm showing him around this estate, and I'm going to be focusing, because he's only giving me 45 minutes. I'm going to be very focused upon the issues of nitrogen and nitrogen fixing. And just as another sort of added story, this is a farm where this farmer uses natural systems as the basis of his business plan. The majority of farming in this country suppresses natural systems. He does the reverse. And as a result of this particular crop, by the way, he has 18 out of the 23 species of British bumblebee on his farm. 18 different species of bumblebee. This farm is heaving with wildlife. I counted 35 brown hare in one field. And if anybody knows the hornet robberfly, it's a terrifying beast, insect, but it's totally harmless. I've actually walked through clouds of them. They are now really rare in this country, the hornet robberfly. It is heaving with wildlife, and his entire food production process is dependent upon the diversity of the wildlife. And it's a landscape that is not iconic, it's not a protected landscape, but it is fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Well, this whole issue about, you remember the debate going on between Chris Smith, chairman of the Environment Agency, and that idiot who was the Secretary of State for DCLG, what was his name, Eric Pickles. And they were both blaming each other, taking great chunks of flesh out of each other in the press. And I suppose, we as a profession say, well, what's the point in having a regulatory system if you're buying a house that's gone through a regulatory process and then it floods and they knew about it? What is the point? What is the point of regulation if actually the very basics? And this is where I'm sort of getting a bit anxious about the planning system in this country. But our biggest challenge, of course, is this question about resilience. Are we really skilled up properly to build in resilience to unknown climate patterns? I mean, we're in a period of transition. We don't know what's going to happen next and where it's going to settle. And I went up to Cumbria as part of my sort of tour around and went to the flood partnership that's developing in Cumbria. And I asked the question of the Environment Agency, okay, so you had 300 millimetres of rain in 24 hours. Where was that on your risk register? Nowhere. Okay, well, where is 600 millimetres in 24 hours? Where's that on your risk register? Nowhere. So this is a huge challenge that I think we can help with, particularly on the issue about land management. But land management all the way through to sustainable urban drainage. This is our business. We can help with this stuff. And the management of resources as a skill, I think, is also incredibly important. We don't give enough attention to it. This is a project that I did when I had to chair a management committee to prepare a management plan for the whole of Southampton Water and the Solent. And so in my panel, I had 8 harbour authorities, including the Queen's Harbour Master and the military docks in Portsmouth, the container Southampton Water, and yachting. This is just harbour as it happens. Different yachting harbour authorities. And this management plan, long term, and they're now working to it, and this sets the whole issues around managed retreat because of sea level rising. And by the way, in the south of England, of course, the land is dropping, so that combination is giving you a centimetre each year. So managed retreat, but it deals also with things like bait digging and all the rest of it. But I think as a profession, we ought to be majoring on resource management, and this is just one example of that on a very big scale. And that management plan is still, in fact, it's been driving the dredging policy for the new aircraft carriers that are going to go into Portsmouth. So I think that's our stuff. I sort of hinted earlier that I think that we can do more for children and young people. I think the state of childhood in this country is shocking, and it's getting worse. And the emotional, the well-being issues, and the health issues that are falling out of the way we handle children, I think, is quite appalling. So I believe we as a profession ought to know all there is to know about child development, and our social science skills are desperately needed so that we can understand that our learning styles are different, and one of the most powerful learning styles is experiential learning. Not regurgitated on a whiteboard or blackboard, but actually transforming the landscape to meet the national curriculum needs in terms of experiential learning. That's really powerful. If you look at schools, and this is a horrible statistic, but 42% of every child in this country, 42, their only experience outside is in the school playground. That's shocking. That is shocking. And then you say, well, what about school playgrounds? They are all too often totally sterile, totally, not child-friendly in any way. Nobody. The education process has failed to articulate the integration of land and outside space with children, child development. Where are we on play? I mean, play is a highly sophisticated landscape in its own right. All aspects of play, and we ought to be really understanding about imaginative play, territorial play. After all, these are landscapes where children are making friends for life. What about reconnecting with natural systems? What about the whole issue about sustainability? So we just, I set up a charity in 1990, which is still going strong, called the Learning Through Landscapes Trust. It's got a programme now with 500 schools all over the UK, where called Pollination. I chair the Pollination Board, and this is all about children restructuring the landscape for pollinating insects. So this is all about citizen science, and this is really about empowering young people to do the very basics of science. But our profession are driving those sort of transformation situations. And then at the other end of the scale, interestingly enough, the same charity has just got a very big research project, and I'm hoping that the lessons learned from these research projects will feed back. And again, Dan and I met the Chief Executive of LTL the other day, and I'm hoping that research will then empower the profession more to really deal with the issues of dementia and care for the elderly. It's a highly complex pattern, but we can transform their lives just by reconnecting those people with appropriate landscapes. So I'm really very optimistic. And I suppose I'll just end with this image. I happen to love ants, by the way. I think that we've got to be attentive to the new things that are on the block, and you all know about Dieter Helm's Natural Capital Committee, and I've sort of been a bit indiscreet because I shared a platform with him the other day, and he was saying he's convinced there's going to be a Natural Capital Act, and you will already know about the 4 pioneers. They're pioneers, not pilots, but actually they're pilots. Manchester for urban, Devon for landscape, Cumbria for catchment, and I can't remember the marine sites, but they're off the Suffolk and Norfolk coastline. So that's intrinsically linked with the new 25-year environment plan that DEFRA are leaking out. It's very difficult to grab hold of it because it's very slippery at the moment. But apparently we're all going to be consulted on it in the new year. So we've got to be attentive to these sort of issues. Now, natural capital, I suppose the big question mark about natural capital is the government really going to be up for it? Because I'm sure you all agree that politics are too short term, our financial structures are too short term. If we're really going to aspire to adhering to conserving natural capital, so what does that mean? It means clean air. That's not just about urban living, it's as much to do with the countryside clean air points about climate change gases as it is to do with particulates in our towns and cities. And if you're going to really do something about clean air in London, just think about the implications of actually achieving that. Do we have the political courage to pursue the sort of aspirations that Dieter Helm has and his natural capital committee? I don't know. Clean water. Well, I've already given you a hint about that, but again, we all know what happens to the aquifers of London. Water, it's really serious stuff. If we're actually going to make something of this accounting system that he's putting in place. Soils. Well, I go back to my point about Brexit. Let's the legacy of Brexit be the restoration of British soils. That would be a fantastic legacy of Brexit decision. And I suppose I go back to another point I've made in other places, that I think as a profession, if we are employed to transform any landscape, our starting point must be the biological health of the place we're in, and to be attentive to ensuring the highest standards and aspiration for restoring the biological health. I've spoken too long, so I must stop it there. Patient.